some of the best stories are the ones hiding in plain sight. And today, we're diving into one of those, the surprisingly recent and, yeah, surprisingly German history of the British royal family's famous name.
So let me ask you a question. Is the British royal family's name actually English? I mean, Windsor, it sounds about as English as you can get, right? Like Windsor Castle. But the real answer is way more complicated, and it unlocks this incredible story of war, rebranding, and layers upon layers of history.
The whole thing really comes down to one single pivotal year, 1917. Before that moment, the royal family wasn't called Windsor at all. Their name was very, very different. So what on earth happened in 1917?
Well, the answer, in a word, is war. By 1917, Britain was bogged down in the absolute horror of World War I, fighting Germany. And back home, anything and everything German was seen as the enemy. This created a massive, and I mean massive, PR problem for the king. Why? Because his family name wasn't English at all. It was German. So, what did they do? They changed it. In what was basically a stroke of marketing genius, King George V just dropped the very German-sounding name Saxe-Coburg and Gotha and adopted the quintessentially English name Windsor. At the exact same time, his relatives, the Battenbergs, anglicized their name to Mountbatten, making a very public break with their German roots.
Okay, so that explains what happened. But it just brings up another question, right? How did the British royal family end up with German names to begin with? For that, we've got to jump back to the 19th century. It really all starts with two key guys. First, in 1840, you have Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, who came over to marry Queen Victoria. Then, about a decade later, in 1851, a young Prince Louis of Battenberg arrives to join the British Royal Navy. These two men carried their family lines and their German names right into the heart of Britain. So, here's how the Windsor line got started. Prince Albert marries Queen Victoria, and their son, Edward VII, becomes the first king from the House of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Think about that. The dynasty itself was German, and it stayed that way until their grandson, George V, made that game-changing switch to Windsor right in the middle of the war. And the Mountbatten story? It's pretty much the same deal. Prince Louis of Battenberg became a British citizen and, just like the king, changed his name in 1917. But the real connection, the one that matters for the modern royals, is when his nephew, Prince Philip, took on that anglicized Mountbatten surname before he married the future Queen Elizabeth, bringing that name right into the line of succession. All right, but hold on a second. When you hear that name, Saxe-Coburg, does something else pop into your head? Like Saxe, as in the Anglo-Saxons. You know, the people who basically founded England. So wait, weren't the Saxons already there? And this is where our story starts to get even bigger.
And it's here that we hit this really amazing historical irony. In 1917, King George V ditches a name with the word Saxe in it, specifically to sound more English, even though the very culture of England itself was founded by ancient migrants called the Saxons.
So what gives? Well, the key thing to get here is the difference between Saxon, the people, and Saxony, the place. One is an ancient Germanic tribe that migrated over to Britain way back in the 5th century. The other is a much, much later German territory, a duchy, that Prince Albert's family just happened to be ruling in the 1800s. We're talking about a gap of over 1,400 years between them.
So here's the bottom line. The first Saxon arrival was this huge migration of peoples that laid the groundwork for the English language and identity. The second one, that was just a single German royal family moving over because of a marriage. They are two totally separate events that just happen to share a similar sounding name.
Okay, so we've started out the whole Saxon versus Saxony thing, but that just blows open an even deeper question. If the Anglo-Saxons were migrants who showed up in the 5th century, who was living in Britain before they even got there? And that means it's time to zoom out again. We have to go way, way back, before the Romans even showed up, before the Anglo-Saxons ever crossed the sea. The island was home to a group of people we now call the Celtic Britons. They are the true bedrock of the island's story. Now, these folks, they were an Iron Age people, and they spoke a Celtic language called Brythonic. And while their language and their culture got mostly pushed aside in the area that became England, their legacy is far from gone. Their most direct descendants today are the Welsh and the Cornish. You know, for the longest time, the old story was that the Anglo-Saxons just came in and completely wiped everybody out or pushed them all into Wales. But modern science, genetics, and archaeology tells us a much more interesting story. History is almost never a clean replacement of one people by another. It's a mixture.
What really happened is more like a layering. You've got the Celtic, Britain bedrock at the bottom. Then you get a layer of Roman cultural influence. Then the Anglo-Saxon migrants arrive, and they bring a new dominant culture and a new language. The result? The English people today are a genetic blend of those original Britons and the later Germanic arrivals. Okay, so if the Brythonic language of these Celtic Britons was pretty much wiped out in England, replaced by Old English, how on earth do we even know about them? How can we hear any whispers of their ancient world? This is our final, deepest zoom out.
Well, believe it or not, the answer is literally all around us. The language didn't completely vanish. It survives, like a fossil record, baked into the names of cities and rivers and hills all over Britain. The evidence is hidden in plain sight, on the map. Just think about it. The name London, that comes from the Brythonic Londinian. Dover is from Dubris, which just meant waters. And this is a fun one. The river Avon, that literally translates to river, river, because Abona was the Brythonic word for river. You see words for valley, combe, and for a hilltop, pen, all over the place. It's like a linguistic ghost haunting the entire landscape. So you have these brilliant scholars acting like historical detectives, right? They're piecing this all together from clues. They look at old inscriptions on Roman stones. They read the accounts of ancient historians. They study those all-important place names on the map. And, crucially, they can work backwards from living Celtic languages like Welsh and Cornish. There's this great quote from a scholar that I think just captures it perfectly. They said, "The language of King Arthur's people is not lost, but it must be carefully excavated from these fragments. It's like a form of historical archaeology." So let's just step back for a second and look at the journey we've taken. We started with what seemed like a simple, almost trivial question about the royal family's name. And that one little question acted like a key, unlocking the door to the entire layered history of Britain, from a 20th century war to a 19th century marriage, a 5th century migration, and all the way down to the island's original Celtic bedrock. And that's what I want to leave you with. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other simple, everyday facts that we just take for granted are actually just the very, very tip of a deep and fascinating historical iceberg?